welcome to Whispers of Ink. I'm Machado de Assis, and now I will read one of my stories.
Let's start with the book, One Dream and Another Dream, which is part of my novels collection. Chapter 1. She believed in dreams. Some people accept them as messages from fate, others dismiss them entirely. A third group tries to explain them through natural causes. Whatever your view, dear reader, I don't need your opinion, just your attention. Especially if you're a widow, because the woman in the story was one, and perhaps you might feel a connection. Genoveva was 24 years old, beautiful, and not exactly rich, though she had enough to live comfortably with her mother. She had been a widow for 3 years. The first year she wore full mourning dress. The next 2 she wore simple black clothes, black hats, and carried black eyes, inherited from both her marriage and her family. The difference now was that her eyes looked toward the ground most of the time. When they did look up, they were always filled with sadness, like someone who had found no comfort in this world and expected none in the next. She lived in a quiet house near Inscreva-se, far from the noise of the city, with her mother and a few servants. She had no children. One had been on the way, but it never arrived. It had vanished when she was 5 months along. The portrait of her late husband, Bachelor Marcones, known at home as Non-Ho, hung in her bedroom, framed in gold and covered with black crepe. Every night, after saying her prayers to the Virgin Mary, Genoveva would look at the portrait before going to bed, as if it could see her in return. Every morning, her first glance was for him. As time passed and softened the sharp edges of her sorrow, those gestures faded naturally and stopped altogether. But the image of her husband never left her heart. Even without outward signs, her longing remained strong. Was she rich? No, not truly. But she had enough. Enough to support herself and her mother without worry. That made her a good match for any young man with ambition, even one with nothing of his own. For a man with some money of his own, she would be an even better match. Together, their fortunes could grow into something much larger. And her beauty? That was the most valuable treasure of all. Lucas sat across from Donna Maria and shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had rehearsed his words a dozen times, but now, under the quiet gaze of Genoveva's mother, he felt unsure. The room was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and forgotten memories. "I came to ask for your blessing," Lucas began, his voice careful, polite. "I wish to propose to your daughter." Donna Maria tilted her head, her expression unreadable. She studied him for a moment before responding. "I won't give you that blessing," she said simply. Lucas blinked. "You mean to ask for her hand?" "Yes," she said. "I won't encourage it." He hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Do you think she might accept me?" "No," she said. "I can see it in your face. She hasn't given you any hope, has she?" Lucas looked down at his hands. "No," he admitted. "I don't have hope. But I do know she felt something. I believe she still does." Donna Maria shook her head gently. "Then don't waste your time. Genoveva will never marry again." Lucas frowned. "Never?" She still sees him, Donna Maria continued. Every day. In her mind, he is still with her. She lives in the memory of their love. She cries for him. She won't give that up for anyone. Lucas leaned forward. Did they love each other so much? They did, she said. More than I've seen in most marriages. Their love was like something from a story. They had only been married 3 years when he died. If it weren't for her strength, she might have followed him. She paused, then added, they were like newlyweds. Always close. Always tender. And it all started with a book. Lucas raised an eyebrow. A book? Yes, she said. They both read the same novel, and there was a line, just one line, that moved them both deeply. He found out later when he read a letter she had written to her friend. She had confessed how that line touched her heart, and her friend confirmed it. She had heard the same confession from Nanho before showing him the letter. Lucas smiled faintly. What was the line? And what was the book? I don't know, Donna Maria said. I never read such things. But I imagine the words were soft, loving, beautiful. She looked past him, toward the window, as if seeing something far away. Whatever they were, she said, they worked like magic. They fell in love deeply, quickly. And for 3 years, they were the happiest couple I've ever known. Lucas sat quietly, absorbing her words. Then he asked, how did he die? A terrible fever, she said. Perniciosa. It came fast and took him before we could understand what was happening. Lucas stood slowly. He looked at Genoveva's mother one last time. I understand, he said. Thank you for your honesty. Donna Maria nodded. Go now. And don't look back. Genoveva was heartbroken in a way no one could understand. She wanted to follow the coffin, clung to it, and fainted. She stayed unconscious almost a week. It took time, care from me, and the help of a doctor to get her through that pain. She never went to the funeral mass, so we had one said for him 3 months later. Her mother liked to say it was a line from a novel that had tied Genoveva to her husband, but they were already in love. The line only gave words to what they both felt. Still, Genoveva loved that romantic idea. And her late husband, Marcondes, had written a novel too. When he was 18, he wrote poetry. At 20, he published The Beauty of the Tomb, a story about a young widow who goes to the cemetery every day to sit by her husband's grave. One day, a young man who also visited the cemetery every afternoon, mourning his lost fiancée, saw her. He admired her loyalty, so much like his own. She saw him too, and their shared grief brought them together. But when he asked her to marry him, she refused and died just 8 days later. Genoveva remembered this story well. She had read it more than 20 times and thought it was the most moving, most natural tale in the world. She even had a special edition printed and gave copies to all her friends and family. Her love for her husband made that gesture seem right, even if it felt heavy to others. The Beauty of the Tomb was not an easy read. But you shouldn't think that Marcondes was a bad writer, or that he wasn't worth the love she still felt. He was smart, well-read, and only made that one mistake in writing. Even a big mistake like that wouldn't have sent him to purgatory. 3 years after Marcondes died, a new man came into Genoveva's life. His name was Oliveira. He was a lawyer, just like her husband had been. He was 30, and he had a real gift for law. He worked hard, earned a good living, and now he was asking for her hand. One day, Genoveva's mother got into a legal fight with a relative who said he had bought 2 houses from her late husband. Oliveira was the name everyone gave when Genoveva asked for a good lawyer. He won her case quickly, much faster than expected. During the process, he visited her house twice. On the first visit, he didn't see her, but on the second, he did. That was enough time for him to find her deeply interesting. Her black dresses, her pale skin, and her large eyes stood out. When the case ended, Genoveva got into a carriage and went straight to Oliveira's office. She wanted to thank him and pay him for his work. 2 payments, he said with a smile. I only accept one, either thanks or money. I already have your thanks. But she began. Please forgive me, he interrupted gently. Your case was simple. It moved fast, and I had very little to do. It would be unfair to ask for more than your appreciation. May I have that? Of course, she replied. She tried to say more, but the words wouldn't come. As she left, she felt as if the kingdom of heaven had just arrived. Still, wanting to do something kind for the generous lawyer, she decided to throw a dinner in his honor. She invited a few close families. Oliveira accepted the invitation happily. He wasn't a man of perfumes or decorations, but that day he sprayed his handkerchief with Jockey Club cologne and pinned a yellow rose to his chest. Genoveva welcomed the lawyer the same way she welcomed other men. But there was a difference. The others always showed their intentions from the first day. Oliveira never asked for anything. He entered the house like a traveler passing through, curious, kind, and interesting. He treated people and things like someone who is only stopping for a short while. Genoveva liked him. Her mother loved him. Back in her room, she thought, I was wrong. I thought this was another proposal. But why did he do what he did? Why did he accept my mother's dinner? For a moment, she wondered if her mother and the lawyer had planned it all. Maybe her mother only wanted to find a way to introduce them and help them get closer. Genoveva started to feel uneasy when, a few days later, her mother mentioned visiting Oliveira's mother, a woman he still lived with. But when Genoveva's mother quickly accepted her daughter's reasons for not wanting the visit, the young woman felt confused. She thought about it more carefully and realized she had been unfair to her mother, suspecting her of pushing too hard. That idea vanished at once. And besides, Oliveira's behavior didn't suggest anything serious. He was friendly, sure, but never forward. Once the families got to know each other, they began to visit each other often. Oliveira lived far away at first, but soon he found a new house much closer and moved there. Both mothers absolutely adored each other. Genoveva's mother couldn't say enough about Oliveira, and Oliveira's mother said the same about Genoveva. It all sounds too neat, too perfectly matched, like something out of a storybook. But I can't tell it any other way because that's exactly how it happened. I know it might sound a bit too tidy, but I don't have time to dress it up any differently. The truth is, the two mothers got along beautifully and worked hard to bring the two young people together. 1 month passed. then 2, then 3. And Olivera still showed no sign of being interested in Genoveva. Yet whenever they spent time together, whether at her house or his, it was always the most pleasant time anyone could imagine. Olivera had a rare gift. He knew how to talk to people in a way that made them feel seen and heard. He made everyone around him feel special. During that time, Genoveva had another suitor. She treated him poorly, even coldly, which surprised everyone, including herself. She couldn't explain why she acted that way. After all, she thought, he didn't ask me to be a widow. What she didn't say, but maybe thought, deep down was, he didn't ask me to be beautiful. Perhaps that idea had fluttered through her mind once or twice. But there was something quiet and natural in her modesty that kept her from thinking too highly of herself, or even admitting how attractive she really was. Whatever the case, Genoveva actually felt sorry for the man. Why couldn't he act more like Olivera, who treats me with respect? She asked herself. Olivera and Genoveva had been close for 4 months now, and through all that time, her admiration for the lawyer had not faded. They shared meals a few times, and even went to the theater together. Olivera opened up to her, not with love confessions, of course, but with thoughts, feelings, and ideas he usually kept to himself. One day, he told her a story from his childhood. When he was little, he once dreamed of becoming a monk. But then, as a boy, he saw the play O Novizio by Martins Pina. In the play, a child dressed as a monk ran across the stage shouting, "I want to be a monk! I want to be a monk!" That moment, Olivera said, ruined his interest in the life of a friar. "I felt like the robe had been disrespected," he explained. "But how could it be disrespectful?" she asked. "The robe itself did nothing wrong." "That's true," he replied. "But I was just a child, and I couldn't shake that childish impression. And maybe it was for the best." "So you're saying you wouldn't have made a good monk?" she asked. "I might have been a bad one," he admitted. "But I wanted to be a great one." "Who knows?" she said. "No," he went on. "I fit in too well with the life of a lawyer, with all the back and forth of this profession. I don't think I ever had the kind of quiet, deep calling it takes to be a monk, not the kind I wanted to be, at least. There's only one way I did end up in a monastery." "What way is that?" she asked. Olivera paused for a moment before answering. "If I became a widower." Genoveva, who had been smiling and waiting for his reply, suddenly turned serious. She didn't say a word. Olivera didn't add anything else, and their conversation that day ended less lively than it had been on other days. Even though she usually fell asleep easily, Genoveva didn't sleep right away that night. On the contrary, she stayed awake long enough to hear the clock strike midnight, and she remained lost in thought for a long time after. The next morning, the first thing she thought about was their conversation from the night before, especially that final sentence from Olivera. What did it mean? On the surface, it didn't seem like much. And maybe, in truth, it meant even less. It sounded like the words of a man who could not imagine life without his wife, and who would retreat into silence and faith if she were ever gone. But let's be honest, that alone doesn't explain why Genoveva found herself so deeply affected by what he had said. The widow, meanwhile, seemed to live on nothing all day but lunch and dinner, and even those were nearly silent affairs. "I have a headache," she told her mother when asked why she was so quiet. Take some antipyrine, her mother replied. No, it'll pass. But it didn't. He said he'd go into a convent if he became a widower, Genoveva thought to herself. And right away, that thought felt like a quiet criticism of her for not doing the same. But why would anyone wish for her to be locked away in a monastery? That question felt twisted. Maybe the right question was the opposite one. Why wouldn't someone wish for her to be in a monastery? But even if the question was twisted, it came naturally. And what feels natural is often not straight at all. Maybe, if you said the first words clearly enough, they could end up meaning the same as the second ones. But I'm not writing a psychology essay here, I'm just telling a story. Behind that thought came another, very different one. Perhaps he had once loved someone so deeply that if he had married and then lost her, he would have disappeared from the world forever. And why wouldn't he still feel that way now? It was possible he loved someone else, that he wanted to get married, and that if something ever happened to the woman he loved, he would vanish from life as he knew it. He had even told her this, the way he used to confess other things to people. He shared thoughts with her that he claimed he never told anyone else. And yet, this explanation, though perfectly reasonable, hit Genoveva harder than the first one. After all, she thought, what does it have to do with me? He's doing the right thing. She didn't sleep well that night. The next day, she went shopping with her mother on Rua do Ouvidor. They stayed out longer than needed, not really knowing why. Every time she left a store, she looked around in every direction. As she passed a small group of people, she shivered slightly and turned to look at them. But she didn't recognize anyone. Still, she thought she had heard Oliveira's voice. There are voices that sound just like others, and they can fool you, especially when your mind is elsewhere. And ears, too, can be easily tricked. Oliveira's words that he would enter a convent if he ever lost his wife wouldn't leave Genoveva's mind. Days passed, and she didn't see the lawyer again. One night, after thinking about everything that had happened, Genoveva looked at her husband's portrait before going to bed. She did the same the next day, and soon this became her nightly habit again, just like in the early days of her widowhood. One evening, soon after falling asleep, she had a strange dream. Her husband appeared to her, dressed in black, just as he had been buried, and placed his hand on her head. They stood in a place that was neither clearly a room nor fully a street, a space in between, unclear and undefined. The most striking part of the dream was the dead man himself. His face was pale, his hands were pale, and though his eyes were alive, they carried the deep sadness of someone gone. "Genoveva," he said. "Nonho," she whispered. "Why do you disturb my death, my eternal rest?" "What do you mean?" "Genoveva, you have forgotten me." "Me? You love someone else." Genoveva shook her head in denial. "You can't even speak," the dead man noted. "No, I don't love anyone," she replied quickly. Nonho stepped back, looked at his former wife, shook his head doubtfully, and crossed his arms. Genoveva could not meet his gaze. "Lift your eyes, Genoveva," he told her. She obeyed. "Do you still love me?" "Oh yes, I still love you," she cried. "Even though I am dead, forgotten by the world, now food for worms?" Even so. Very well, Genoveva. I don't want to force you into anything, but if it's true that you still love me, do not stain your love with another man's affection. I want. Do you swear it? I swear. The dead man reached out his hands and took hers. Then, wrapping one arm around her waist, he began a fast, mournful waltz, a dizzying spin that felt like madness. Genoveva could no longer focus on anything. The space around them was no longer a room, a street, or even a plaza. It became a vast field that grew wider with each turn. When they finally stopped, Genoveva found herself in a huge open plain, like an ocean without shores. She looked around, but the earth seemed to meet the sky on all sides. She tried to scream, but felt her husband's cold hand on her mouth as he asked once more, "Do you still swear?" "I swear," Genoveva answered. Nonho pulled her close again, his hands around her waist, and the waltz began once more. The room spun faster than before, the lights blurring into streaks as they twirled. But something strange happened. The world around them seemed to shrink, like a curtain closing in from all sides. What once felt like an endless ballroom now became a small, dimly lit room. And in that room stood a narrow bed and a wooden coffin, open and waiting. The dead man stopped dancing. He stepped away from her and climbed into the coffin with slow, stiff movements. Then, just before closing the lid, he reached out one pale hand and waved goodbye. Genoveva saw it clearly. She screamed. The scream woke her up. But it wasn't the first. She had cried out before, in her sleep, and when she opened her eyes, she saw a servant from the house standing beside her bed. The woman was dressed in a plain cotton robe, her face full of worry. "What happened, miss?" the servant asked. "A nightmare," Genoveva whispered. "Did I speak? Did I say anything? Did I shout?" "You screamed twice before, and now again," the woman said. "But no words, just cries." Genoveva could not fall back asleep. She lay in bed, eyes wide, heart pounding. By morning, she dozed off for a short while, but the sleep was broken and light. When she got up, she told her mother nothing of the dream, only that she had had a bad night. But in her heart, she believed. She believed the dream was a warning. She believed it was her husband reaching out to her, telling her something she already knew, but tried to forget. She remembered the way he had looked at her in the coffin, the way his hand moved to say goodbye. It was not just a dream. It was a message. She had made a promise, long ago, and promises like that could not be broken. She thought about Oliveira. She thought about how close she had come to falling for him. And she thought about how word of that feeling, maybe just a whisper, maybe just a look, had reached the world where her husband now lived. That must be why he came to her in the dream. She believed dreams had meaning. To her, they were signs from above, or from the dead. Some dreams were silly, passing thoughts that meant nothing. But others carried truth. And this one was clear. She would end it. She would stop whatever feeling Oliveira had awakened in her. She would not let it grow. That night before bed, she went to the portrait of her late husband. She kissed her fingers and touched the frame. She whispered a prayer for his soul. Then she climbed into bed, afraid of what she might dream. Sleep came slowly, but finally her eyes closed. And for the first time in nights, she dreamed of nothing at all. No voices. No hands waving goodbye. No coffins. Only sunlight, warm and soft, pouring through the window in the morning. Oliveira had not visited her house in over a week. Genoveva felt uneasy about his absence. Her mother wanted to go to his house to check if he was sick, but Genoveva stopped her. At the start of the next week, he returned with his mother. He had caught a cold and stayed in bed for 3 days. "I told you so," said Genoveva's mother. "I said it must be something like a cold, because a doctor wouldn't stay away for no reason." "And you didn't believe me?" Oliveira asked Genoveva with a smile. "I have to admit I didn't," he replied. "You think, like my mother, that I'm immune to illness." After that, visits between the two houses went on as usual. But Genoveva stayed firm in her decision to end any hope Oliveira might still have had. He remained the same polite and careful man he always was. Weeks passed. One day, Genoveva heard that Oliveira was getting married. "No way," she told her friend who brought the news. "Why not?" her friend asked. "He's marrying the daughter of an English merchant, a man named Stanley. Everyone knows this." "Well, I don't go out much," Genoveva said, trying to explain. Let's give her credit. It just didn't seem real. He visited them so often, it was hard to believe he was already planning a wedding. When would he even see his bride? Still, Genoveva could not ignore the possibility. Maybe his future father-in-law was strict, someone who didn't allow nightly visits. She also noticed that Oliveira had become less consistent with her. Some days he seemed distant, even cold. Then came a look, a word, a small joke, or a handshake. The handshakes were the most common gesture. In fact, she began to notice when they were weak. She would feel let down on those days and wait for the next visit to see if the handshake would be stronger. She blamed this curiosity on her own vanity. Just the pride of a pretty woman, she told herself. But this time, she waited for him with real impatience. And when he arrived and greeted her with a firm handshake in the living room, it truly made her day. Genoveva regretted not telling her mother the news about the marriage, so that her mother could ask the lawyer. If she couldn't do it, she decided to speak herself. "Me, my lady?" Genoveva said, still smiling. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Oh, it must be another Oliveira, also a lawyer, who is really getting married this month. I will never marry again." That night, before sleeping, Genoveva looked lovingly at her late husband's portrait, said a double prayer for him, and went to bed late, afraid of dreaming about another waltz. But she woke up with no dreams at all. What could possibly connect a widow who promises in a dream to her late husband that she will never remarry, and a lawyer who publicly says he will never marry? It seems like nothing, or maybe everything. But the reader doesn't yet know that this Oliveira has a plan. He won't jump into anything unless she gives him both of her hands, although he loves her, as all lovers claim. His last statement was meant to make a strong impression, almost like a challenge, hoping she would prove him wrong. And as he left, he thought he might have succeeded. Her hand had trembled a little ever slightly, just the tips of her fingers. No, that must have been an illusion. Her fingers had done nothing to him. Please note that I am not responsible for these boring stories about fingers and counterfingers, for meaningless words, for half glances, or for unclear looks. I'm not responsible for his plans, or her promises either. If I could, I would have brought them together on the second day, held their hands, and said, "Get married already." Then I would move on to more interesting stories. But people are the way they are. We must accept them like this. Days passed, first 1, then 2, then 3 weeks, without any big events. Oliveira seemed to have left behind the strategy of Fabius Cunctator, the Roman general known for delaying battle. One day, he finally confessed clearly to the widow. He loved her. It was a Saturday, at her house before dinner, while both mothers had left them alone. Genoveva was opening the pages of a French novel that Oliveira had brought her. Oliveira stared at the watercolor again, maybe the 100th time. It hung on the wall between 2 windows, catching the light just right. He could hear the ivory paper knife slicing through the thick pages of a book. The 2 ladies had left the room, and their absence left a heavy quiet behind. Still, he didn't turn his head or look away from the painting. Suddenly, he lowered his eyes and looked at the widow. She felt his gaze and tried to say something. "Do you know if the novel is any good?" she asked, pausing her cutting of the pages. "They say it is," he replied. Oliveira got up and sat on a small sofa near her. His eyes went to her hands, resting on the open book. But the moment he looked, her hands moved again, slicing the pages with careful energy as if motion could hide their beauty from him. The silence stretched. It was an awkward kind, the kind that begs to be broken. Genoveva wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words or the right moment. Oliveira, on his part, felt the urge to tell her everything what she must know by now. But he held back. Instead, he said something simple. He praised her hands. It seemed a waste of tension to end like that. But Oliveira, now embarrassed by the situation, forced himself to speak with honesty. He asked her, with all his heart, if she would be his wife. This time, her hands stopped. No plan, no pretense. Genoveva, clearly shaken, fixed her eyes on the book. The silence between them grew deeper and longer than before. He watched her. Her eyelids were low, her breath shallow. What was she thinking? Was she hesitating because she was shy to say yes? Or was she trying to find a polite way to say no? Oliveira had reason to believe it was the first. In the past few days, there had been a quiet understanding between them. A silent agreement. But now, no word came. And then, the memory of a dream returned to complicate things. Genoveva remembered the sad waltz, the promise, and the coffin. Her face turned pale. Just then, the 2 ladies came back into the room. Dinner was quieter than usual. Genoveva lay awake most of the night, tossing and turning beneath the heavy sheets. The house was quiet now, the guests long gone, and the silence felt heavier than before. She had sent them away with polite smiles, but inside her heart was a storm. The next morning dragged on like a slow river. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, her thoughts tangled and restless. She waited for Oliveira, but he didn't come. He showed up the next evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills. When she saw him, her breath caught in her throat. He looked nervous, unsure, and that made her feel a little stronger. She didn't speak right away. She studied his face, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Then she said yes. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't proud. It was soft, almost shaky, but it was final. And in that moment, something changed. The world didn't stop turning, and the stars didn't blink differently, but inside her chest, something shifted. She was engaged now. The word felt strange in her mind, like a dress that didn't quite fit. In the days that followed, people came and went. There were plans to make, lists to write, visits to return. Genoveva played her part well, smiling when she should smile, nodding when expected. But deep down, something stirred. A memory. A promise. 2 weeks before Oliveira had asked his question, she had stopped looking at her late husband's portrait before bed. She used to speak to it, quietly, as if he might hear her. But now, the frame sat untouched on the dresser. After the engagement, though, she began to glance at it again, just for a second, just long enough to feel something strange in her chest. Then came the night, 4 days before the wedding, when she remembered the dream of the waltz, the one she had never danced. She remembered the promise she had made, the vow whispered in the dark, when she thought her life was over. She lay down with that memory in her mind, and sleep came late. The first night, nothing happened. But the second night was different. In her dream, there was no music, no ballroom, no swirling dresses or soft laughter. Instead, she stood in a dark field beneath a sky half blue, half black with storm clouds. In the distance, she could see gray figures moving in circles, like dancers far away. But this wasn't a dance. Then she saw him, her husband. He stood before her, tall and serious. His face was pale, his eyes deep with sadness. "How could you forget?" he asked. She tried to speak, but couldn't. Her mouth was covered not by her own hands, but by someone else's. She turned her head and saw Oliveira beside her, his fingers pressed against her lips. "Answer me, Genoveva," her husband said. She tried to move, but her feet were stuck in the mud. "You've forgotten everything," he said. "You are condemned to hell." A flash of fire cut across the blue sky, lighting it in a terrible red. From the storm clouds came a wild wind, strong and cold. It lifted her off the ground along with her dead husband and her living fiancé. They flew through the air, spinning and tumbling, until they landed on a narrow, muddy road filled with snakes. "This is hell," the wind seemed to scream. "Hell." Oliveira still held her mouth shut. She could barely breathe. Her heart pounded, her chest ached, and all she could do was cry out in silence. She woke up sweating, the sheets tangled around her legs. The room was dark, but she could hear the clock ticking on the wall. She sat up slowly, her hands trembling. And from that night on, she could not sleep without fear. Genoveva sat up in bed, her body trembling as the last echoes of her dream faded into the morning light. The wind had stopped howling outside, and the sky, once dark and restless, now showed the soft gray of early dawn. But the images in her mind still lingered vividly. In the dream, the wind had died suddenly. Snakes rose from the ground, lifting their bodies silently into the air, each one slipping into the sky like smoke. A few didn't make it all the way, tails still dangling below, half in this world, half in another. Genoveva felt a sudden rush of freedom. The executioner was gone. Her dead husband stood before her, upright and solemn, his hand resting gently on her head. His voice was deep, like a prophecy carved in stone. "You will die if you marry again." Then, just like that, everything vanished. She woke up, heart pounding, breath short. Morning had arrived, soft and quiet, as if nothing had happened. She stood up slowly, still shaken. The fear didn't leave right away, it took time to loosen its grip. Later that day, when she thought back to the dream, she told herself, it was only a dream. Still, she couldn't shake the words from her mind. Months passed. Despite the warning, despite the chill it left in her bones, she got married. And she didn't die.
Thank you for listening so far. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like our channel and click the bell to be notified whenever a new book is read. Have you heard of Machado de Assis? Machado de Assis, born in Rio de Janeiro in 1839, is considered one of the greatest writers in Brazilian literature and a master of psychological realism. He was a novelist, poet, playwright, and short story writer whose works explore the complexities of human behavior with irony, subtlety, and deep introspection. Among his most famous novels are Dom Casmurro, which questions truth and memory, and the posthumous memoirs of Brás Cubas, a satirical narrative told by a deceased man. Machado's literature often reflects the contradictions of Brazilian society, addressing issues like race, class, power, and identity in a sophisticated yet accessible style. Despite being born into poverty and facing racial prejudice, Machado de Assis rose to become the president of the Brazilian Academy of Letters and a symbol of literary excellence. His sharp wit and profound observations about society and the human soul make his works timeless and universally relevant. Today, he is recognized not only as a Brazilian icon, but also as a world-class author whose legacy continues to influence generations of writers and thinkers. Machado de Assis shows us that literature can be both elegant and critical, intimate and universal, humorous and profound. His stories remain as powerful and thought-provoking today as they were more than a century ago. Machado is a treasure of world literature, and through his voice, we discover the infinite layers of the human experience.